Would you like to accelerate your career and reach your full potential in just minutes a day? Welcome to the LEADx Show with New York Times best-selling author and Inc. 500 entrepreneur, Kevin Kruse.
How can you define your brand to get the future you want? Hello, everyone. Kevin Kruse here. And today we're going to talk about advancing your career faster than ever before. But first, I want to encourage you to subscribe to our newsletter at leadx.org. Each issue has actionable tips you can try right away to advance your career and to fulfill your potential. Visit leadx.org. Our guest today is a former presidential campaign spokeswoman turned marketing strategy consultant and professional speaker. Her clients include Google, the World Bank, Microsoft, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation as well. She's a frequent contributor to Harvard Business Review and Forbes. She's the author of Reinventing You and Stand Out, which was named the #1 leadership book of 2015 by Inc. magazine. Our guest is Dorie Clark. Welcome, Dorie.
Kevin, thanks for having me.
Great to have you on the show. Really appreciate the time. So we are going to talk about personal branding in just a minute, but I want to start by asking a couple of questions that our listeners are always curious about. And the first is this whole notion and debate about work-life balance. Like, what do you think about it, and do you have any tips for people who are trying to achieve it?
Well, I think that one thing that I have tried to do, and which I do think is important for hard charging professionals, the kind of people who want to be successful, and so work ends up eating up a disproportionate share of our time and our mental energy, is that you really have to make a concerted effort to block out the time for the other parts of your life. Otherwise, if left unchecked, work it's like this. I know, thinking back to junior high science, it's like a macrophage, and it's just going to eat everything else in its path. And so for me, where this really came to a head was in 2015. I published my book, Stand Out, and I spent all year promoting it incredibly hard. I was on 160 podcasts.
Wow.
I did guest blogging. I did a multi-city book tour. And by the end of the year, I would go to these holiday parties, and people that I'd meet would ask me things like, "So, what do you do for fun?" And I realized I had nothing to tell them other than work. And I had this horrifying realization that unless you were either a business author or someone who really liked reading business books, I was probably pretty boring. And so I needed to really try to insert a different dynamic in order to change that. And so one thing that I did in 2016, which was a big change for me, was I started taking stand-up comedy classes.
Wow.
I took 2 of them, and I've now performed on stages in New York probably about a dozen times. So it's been a great outlet for me, and it makes me feel less boring.
Now, Dorie, how come subscribers to your email newsletter don't know about your upcoming appearances? Because I haven't heard about all these New York shows.
I'm keeping it a little bit on the lowdown, Kevin, until I become truly awesome. But I will for sure keep you posted. And when I am ready for my grand coming out, when I'm going to reach for that brass ring, and I'm just about ready to get hired onto SNL, I'll be sure to let you know.
Until then, listeners, we have to go over to rascals.com or the Comedy Club and sign up for their newsletter so we'll know when open mic night is. So, Dorie, that is great. So tell us about a time. You're so successful now in so many areas, but I'm sure early in your career you must have failed as a leader in some way. Share with us one of those times, and what did you learn from it?
Well, I've been self-employed now for quite a while, for about a decade. But prior to that, I worked in journalism, and then I worked in politics. And I think back when it comes to managerial failures or leadership failures, probably one of the trickiest situations that I had was I was working on a political campaign, and I was running the press department. And there was a guy who was working underneath me, and he was not someone that I chose. My boss had met him and liked him, and I actually think had a crush on him, which was not very helpful. And so she said to me, "Oh, you need to hire this guy. He's really great." And I needed a staffer. I desperately needed help. I wanted to get someone on board quickly. And so I said, "Okay, sure. If you think he's good, let's bring him on." And he turned out to be kind of a problem employee. He was a little bit lazy and a little bit sloppy, at least according to my perfectionistic impulses, and it was really hard to figure that out. And it was okay. We managed to to coexist throughout the duration of the campaign, but I think I really could have done a better job because I got sucked into the dynamic, and I think that I should have done a better job at trying to rise above the dynamic or reshape it. And so for me, retrospectively, a book that would have been very helpful, which I read later and thought was very insightful, was one called The Elephant in the Room by a friend of mine named Diana McLean Smith. And it focuses on how you can begin to interrupt the bad patterns that you have at work with a boss or with a subordinate or with a colleague. And I think that I probably should have done a little more of that and a little less of just fuming.
The elephant in the room. I took a note of that myself. So your most recent books are Reinventing You and Stand Out. And let's start at the beginning. So who needs a personal brand? Isn't that something that, consultants like you and entrepreneurs should be worrying about?
The first starting place for that, Kevin, is that actually everyone already has a personal brand.
Ah.
Yes. And so I think that cluing into that gives us an enormous power, because then we can begin to see the world as it is. Because the truth is, a personal brand is really, it's just a synonym for your reputation. Everyone has a reputation. People think something about you. The only question is, what do they think about you? And is it what you would wish them to think about you? And so, when we talk about personal brand, it might sound like this fancy thing that only consultants or authors or whoever need to worry about. But ultimately, I think most people recognize that your reputation, in a lot of ways, is the most important asset you have. Do people think that you are a person of integrity? Do they think that your work is work of high quality? Those are the things that we want people to think of us. And so it's getting strategic about making sure we are sending the right message and sending the right signals so that they will, in fact, understand what our true talents are.
Yeah, this is really gold, because I think that when I get people asking me for advice about personal branding, often it's that, unfortunately, often they've just been laid off and they're trying to get a job and they think now's the time they have to think about their personal brand, or they want to, do a career transition. They want to pivot their career. But I also say to people, I said, listen, I've been around now long enough where, there's no such thing as job security. So even if you think you're doing well in, Big Co, whatever your role is there, you want to know that, or you should want to be known at the higher levels and be known as a high potential, even if you're fairly, young or new in your career. And God forbid there are layoffs or something, you want to be on the right list, not the wrong list. So everybody's got a reputation. It's just, are you going to be mindful of what yours is and intentional in trying to nudge it in the right direction? And Dorie, so let's just build on that. If I really have no idea how to even start branding myself, how do I figure out what makes me unique?
Well, one of the exercises that I share in Reinventing You, Kevin, which I think can be helpful for a lot of people, is what I call the 3-word exercise. And this is a kind of stripped down, super quick, super easy life hack version of a 360. Many of your listeners may have had 360s in the past where, an executive coach will come in and they'll interview all the people around you and kind of come back to you with a thoughtful and an anonymized analysis of what your strengths and weaknesses are. That's fantastic if you can have, if you have the opportunity to have this in-depth analysis. But for most of us, that may not happen that frequently. You may not have access to it. And so with a 3-word exercise, you can kind of do it very quickly on your own. And what this looks like is that over the course of, let's say, a week, you reach out to about half a dozen friends and colleagues. And these should be people that know you reasonably well. And you ask them literally just one simple question. And that is, if you had to describe me in only 3 words, what would they be? And where this is helpful is that by the time you get to the 4th, the 5th, the 6th person, you are going to start to see patterns in what they say about you. And where the reason that this is helpful, it's not necessarily that they're going to tell you things that you've never thought of about yourself. Probably whatever they say to you is going to be reasonably familiar if you have a decent amount of self-knowledge. But the part that is critical, and the part that for most professionals they have a hard time with, is understanding which of their traits are most unique and most memorable in the eyes of other people. And so when you start to hear that, when you start to, to hear everybody say, oh, you're creative. Oh, you have such great ideas. Oh, you're creative. Then you begin to say, oh, wait a minute. That sounds like a strength that I can lead with. That sounds like something that could actually be the cornerstone of a brand.
Okay, so this is great. So let's say we get that feedback. We're told we're creative, we're innovative, and these are all obviously highly desirable things in the workplace. So how do we start to craft, our narrative around that? And even specifically, I'm assuming we need to put this forth, whether it's our LinkedIn profile or a coffee conversation with somebody, right? I mean, we need to get this message across in all these areas. How do we do it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that one thing that you can do potentially as a follow-up, if the people that you are talking to with this 3-word exercise are people that you have a good, a close, trusting relationship with, you can also sometimes ask them a follow-up question. And that is, oh, you mentioned that you think I'm creative. Thank you. Are there specific examples that you can think of? Like, why was it that creative came to mind so quickly for you? And then, they may say things like, oh, well, in meetings, you're always coming up with these, out of the box answers, or, oh, well, you just have this style that's so distinctive, and it's, like 3 years ahead of what everybody else is doing, or, whatever those things are. But you can begin to pick up data points of what it is you're doing that is spreading that message. And that is really helpful because it means that you can do more of those things. You can kind of double down on what's already working, which is helpful. And I think that another thing that we often forget about is just making use of the opportunities that present themselves to brand yourself. And I'll explain what I mean. Something that I feel like is just a perennial missed opportunity for most professionals is at almost any networking event or conference or whatever, if you see someone that you know, what they're probably going to do is come up to you and say, oh, hey, Kevin, how's it going? What's new with you? What are you working on, Kevin? Some question like that.
Right.
And the vast majority of people don't prepare for that. And they just say something really stupid like, oh, nothing much. Oh, same old stuff. And it's a complete waste because in that moment, it's not like you are bragging about yourself. It's not like you are, thumping your chest and saying, oh, listen to me, I'm so great. Let me tell you about me. They have literally asked you a question where they are waiting for a response. They want to hear. And so this is the moment where if you want to drive home that Kevin is a creative guy, this is the place where you can have the answer ready in your head, where you can say, oh, well, I'm actually really excited because I'm working on this cool new project doing XYZ, and we're coming up with, innovative new solutions to the water crisis, or, whatever it is. And those are the moments where you're able to implant your brand in small ways into people's minds.
Okay, so this is just a follow-up on that. Would you go so far as to suggest that we all sort of need that, quote unquote 30-second elevator pitch in our pocket ready to hand out? Or you're like, nah, it doesn't have to be like that formal. Like you need to put your best strength, your best projects forward.
I think that the elevator pitch itself gets kind of too much hype in a lot of ways. People get very fixated on it. And so I would say that I would rank it as something that is useful and, definitely a handy thing to have. But what I think is even more useful, to your point, is to know in a rough sense, okay, these are the tools in my toolkit. These are the things that are important to me that I'd like to talk about. So for instance, if what you're wanting your brand in the world to be is that you'd like to be seen as a creative, philanthropic kind of guy, maybe your go-to things that you talk about are your innovative new water project and the charity board that you just joined, or something like that. Those are both great topics of conversation, and you don't have to say, "Oh, I'm so philanthropic," but when you tell people about the work that you're doing, that is the implicit message that gets transmitted.
Yeah, that's great. And Dorie, as you were just giving that example, I actually remembered I've got a business friend. I see him like once a year. And years ago, when I approached him at a conference, exactly as you said, I'm like, "Hey, Philip, what's going on?" Instead of him doing the same, crazy busy, same old, or whatever, I said, "What's going on? What have you been doing for fun?" And so I expected him to talk about hobbies, vacations, family stuff. And instead he said, "Oh, I joined the board of the library project. We're building libraries in rural Asia." Now,
nice.
I didn't realize at the time. No, so and funny. So I ended up donating to this charity, getting involved in all this other stuff. Whether he, was looking for that, I don't know. But then throughout the conference, as I would just be hanging around or at the cocktail hour, almost no matter what anybody asked him as that opening, he would mention the library project. And so it never really occurred to me until just now that he clearly, and I don't think it was like an elevator pitch or that, I'm going to try to get donors or something. I think, and it's true, like I think of Philip as business savvy and philanthropic, just because that's what he talks about. That's what he led with. And, maybe that elevator pitch is a good exercise to like help you figure it out. But then then you should probably rip up the index card just so it doesn't come off the wrong way.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's a perfect example.
So let me ask this before wrapping it up. So Reinventing You, I mean, it's a great handbook for anybody. Well, it's great around personal branding, but really for anybody that's thinking about making a career shift. They think, I don't want to be doing this anymore. So what would be a starting point if I've got a listener out there who, maybe she's a 30-year-old attorney and said, what, I just don't like the law, and what Dorie does sounds fun. I want to become a marketing strategy consultant. Like, how does this 30-year-old attorney begin to pivot in that way?
Well, as I have been studying over the past number of years, Kevin, the process of how people develop a robust personal brand and move into becoming recognized for their knowledge in a field, what I have come to discover and what my research in interviewing hundreds of top professionals has shown is that fundamentally there are three ingredients that you need in order to become recognized for your expertise in a field. And that is content creation, social proof, and your network. And so the suggestions that I'm going to make for your hypothetical career changer is actually rooted in all of them. And this is one of my favorite reinvention suggestions because it literally, with one activity, you're one stone, you are killing all three birds. You are hitting all three of the key elements that you need.
I'm ready to take notes. This is good.
That's right. So what I would suggest is that if you are looking to make a career change, you should start blogging or otherwise creating content. This could be podcasts or videos or whatever about your new field. And the reason this is so useful is multifold. Number one, it enables you to basically have your own curriculum of personal development, because as you are writing about issues, you are learning about issues. It gives you a forum to learn things and work through them so that you are more educated and sound more credible when you're talking to other people. Number two, it is a great networking tool because oftentimes what you'll be doing is interviewing people and then writing about their thoughts, especially if you're in the nascent stages. Maybe you say, oh gosh, I don't really know a lot about the field. I don't really have any expertise to share. Fine. Interview people that you think are smart and then write about their ideas. It's a way to get to know them and essentially to bank a favor with them because you are shining a positive light on them. That's powerful. And then, in a literal sense, you are creating content so that when people are searching for your name on the internet, they're going to start seeing these blog posts, whether they're on LinkedIn or Medium or wherever. That is going to increasingly be what is associated with you. So you're going to begin to transition from the old brand online to the new brand by dint of this content creation. And finally, it does create this social proof because people look at your LinkedIn feed, your Twitter feed, whatever. You inevitably, if you're spending all your time, writing and talking to people and interviewing, you're going to start talking more about the new field, and they're going to say, oh, she's creating such thoughtful, knowledgeable content. Maybe over time you're beginning to be able to place these blog posts not just on your own LinkedIn page, but in an industry journal. And they'll say, I used to think of her as a lawyer, but now I really see she understands the marketing world well. Let's hire her. Let's bring her on.
Wow, this is a brilliant advice and a great tactic. I was talking just recently to Wendy Sachs, who's written about career reinvention, and she was making the point that a lot of people will by default think they need to get smart about the new industry or the new area. And she was saying, in this age of YouTube, et cetera, that's the easier part. What's harder is that social network. She agreed that you need the network, the connections. And she talked about going to conferences and other, good ideas for building that network. I like what you said. You throw one stone and you're going to be learning. You're going to be building content out as you build your network at the same time. And I think just by association, that kind of a blog, those kinds of articles and interviews are going to provide tremendous social proof. And if you can get any of those republished elsewhere, I mean, that's even better. Wow, that's great, Dorie. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin.
So as a final question, I like to challenge our listeners to get a little bit better every single day. What do you want to challenge them to do? What's an action they can take right now?
All right. So I was mentioning the three key components that we all should be thinking about with content creation, social proof, and your network. This is the foundation of what I teach in an online course that I offer called Recognized Expert. And so one of the activities that I suggest in the course, and I think that is something that's really useful for just about anyone, is to create a prioritized list of your contacts. And let me explain what I mean. Some people might think that sounds mercenary in some way, like you're ranking your friends. But what I'm talking about specifically, this isn't about your personal friends. You can be friends, of course, with whoever you want. What we're thinking about here is your business contacts. And the metric you should be thinking about is simply who are the people in your professional life that you respect the most, trust, and want to learn from the most. And I think that with a little bit of thinking, you sit down for 15 minutes, you could create a pretty good list of, let's say, 10 people that you feel meet those criteria. And the reason that's so important to do is that for many of us, that's implicit in our heads. But if we sit down and make it explicit, it makes it a lot easier to do the next step. And this is where the rubber meets the road, which is becoming intentional about who we are spending our time with. For so many of us, these busy professionals, our schedule oftentimes, if we do not really try to steer it deliberately, gets dictated by other people's priorities. Who do you spend time with? Well, it's probably the people in the office next to you, or maybe it's just the people who are really persistent about emailing you and saying, let's get coffee. And that is not how to steer your life. If you want to accomplish something, you can't just be a ship buffeted in the wind from one email to another. You need to be steering and heading in a direction. And that means spending time proactively with the people you respect most and want to learn from. And if you have it actually written down, if you know explicitly who they are, then it enables you to become proactive. And instead of just responding, it's you reaching out and saying, could we get coffee? Or I'm going to work out next Wednesday. Do you want to join me? Or let's get a walk in, during lunchtime, or whatever it is. But you need to make the choice in terms of building a solid and powerful network to surround yourself with the people that you like and respect. And it's in that choosing that you are able to separate yourself.
Wow, powerful advice. There's an old saying in the sort of personal success genre that you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And I think, similar in this vein, it's almost like a personal board of directors or mentors. And whether they're people that you already know, but you should be spending more time with, or even aspirational figures, people that maybe you need to reach out and make that initial connection. That would be a powerful activity to do starting today. So, Dorie, what's the best way our listeners can find out more about you, your company, your books?
Well, thanks, Kevin. If folks would like to learn more, on my website, which is DorieClark.com, it's DorieClark.com, I have more than 400 free articles available that I've written for places like Forbes and the Harvard Business Review. And I also have a free 42-page self-assessment workbook that helps people really think strategically about their brand. And it walks you step by step through discovering who you are, what you want to be known for, and how to spread those ideas. And you can download that for free at my website, DorieClark.com.
Great. All right, friends, you've just been mentored by personal branding guru Dorie Clark. Check out her books on Amazon.com or your favorite bookstore. You can get the links she mentioned and show notes from this interview over at LEADx.org. And before you go, I got to ask a favor. If you've even gotten one new idea from this show, just take a minute and leave a short, honest review on iTunes or Stitcher, because the more reviews a podcast gets, the more likely it is that iTunes will show it off to new people. Until next time, my friends, remember, you don't need a title to be a leader. It's not about power or authority. Leadership is influence. How are you going to lead today?